Hello, hello. How is everyone today? Good, good. Cold, is that what you said? Go visit out east. They got snow on the beaches in Florida. Y'all seen that? Yeah, Lord bless them. My wife said this morning early, she was looking, she said, it looks like everyone got snow except us. I said, you say that as though we missed out. I don't feel that way at all. No, absolutely. We did not miss out. We dodged a bullet, that's what I call it. Yeah. 1914, did we have an accumulation of snow here in Yuma? There's been a time I think it has spit some snow, but no accumulation. Yeah. Uh-huh. Where? Oh, in New Hampshire? Minus 20. Minus 27. I've actually in Chicago one year, right on Christmas. It was a negative 25, and the wind chill was a negative 65. And that's dangerous, scary cold. And so, who's cold? Yeah, are you kidding me? After all of that, what prayer request did you have? Let me give you one. I just got, before I walked in the room, pray for Dave's wife, Cindy Wolverton. Went back into ICU, had to have some surgeries done, bleeding ulcers, that sort of thing. And he's just asking prayer for the whole situation. Lord's will be done there. And so pray for Cindy. When you see Dave, some of you guys go to Bible study with Dave. Encourage him, and that'd be good. And then on Miss Rosalie, she has been admitted to the hospital. And going to be potentially doing some surgery, but is not needing visitors right now. And so she fell. I'm sorry if you didn't get that. She fell. Um, uh, where's Doris Manor? Is she in? No, let's see. Um, fell over the dog. I never did hear back whether the bone was actually broken or not. It was? Okay. Yeah. This back here broke. Yeah. Okay. So pray for Miss Rosalie. Miss Rosalie, you know her, sits right up here, and pray for her. Then she's is admitted in the hospital. They're waiting for swelling to go down before they can do anything. All right. Any others? Yes. Okay. Okay. I'm looking for it on my list. Just a minute. Okay. All right. Um, yes, ma'am. Okay. We have them on here. Yep. Can you pray for them? All right. Others? Okay. You see they're doing some work out there on the fountain? Yeah, we might. They said maybe by the end of the month. I don't think so, though. Today's the 22nd. Um, let's call it the end of February. I'll take that. I'll take that. Are you passing out your Friend Day invite cards? Oh, that's big stuff. Um, grab you one on the way out today and be able to get someone here. Had, had a great Sunday this last Sunday and plan to on that day as well. Well, let's look at our Bibles, and I'm just a little bit loud. I think I'm just a little loud. I feel I'm holding back so I'm not too loud, and so maybe it's Judges chapter number 16 is where we are. Judges 16. This is the third and final look at the final judge that we're going to look at, Samson. And you'll remember me telling you that this next chapter, if you thought the previous one was rough, this one's worse. And what I'd like to do is read all the way through the chapter so that you get a good sense of what it is. And then we'll just go back through and unpack it verse by verse. And if we, I think we shouldn't have any trouble finishing tonight here. Judges chapter 16. Samson went to Gaza, and that name has held. If you're wondering, is that the same Gaza? That's the same area right there along the Mediterranean that you're seeing in the news today, okay? Samson went to Gaza, and there he saw a prostitute, and he went into her. The Gazites were told, Samson has come here, and they surrounded the place and set an ambush for him all night at the gate of the city. They kept quiet all night, saying, let us wait till the light of the morning, then we will kill him. But Samson lay just till midnight, and at midnight he arose and took hold of the doors of the gate of the city and the two posts, and pulled them up, bar and all, and put them on his shoulders, and carried them to the top of the hill that is in front of Hebron. After this, he loved a woman in the valley of Sorek, whose name was Delilah. And the lords of the Philistines came up to her and said to her, seduce him, and see where his great strength lies, and by what means we may overpower him, that we may bind him to humble him. And we will each give you 1,100 pieces of silver. So Delilah said to Samson, please tell me where your great strength lies, and how you might be bound, that one could subdue you. Samson said to her, well, if they bind me with 7 fresh bowstrings that have not been dried, then I'll become weak and be like any other man. Well, then the lords of the Philistines brought up to her 7 fresh bowstrings that had not been dried, and she bound him with them. And now she had men lying in ambush in an inner chamber, and she said to him, the Philistines are upon you, Samson. But he snapped the bowstrings as a thread of flax snaps when it touches the fire. So the secret of his strength was not known. Then Delilah said to Samson, behold, you have mocked me and told me lies. Please tell me how you might be bound. Fellas, never mind. I said we're going to wait till we get all the way through. Verse 11. And he said to her, well, if they bind me with new ropes that have not been used, then I shall become weak and be like any other man. So Delilah took new ropes and bound him with them, and said to him, the Philistines are upon you, Samson. And the men lying in ambush were in an inner chamber, but he snapped the ropes off his arms like a thread. Then Delilah said to Samson, until now you've mocked me and told me lies. Tell me how you might be bound. And he said to her, well, if you weave the 7 locks of my head with the web, and fasten it tight with the pin, then I shall become weak and be like any other man. And so while he slept, Delilah took the 7 locks of his head and wove them into the web. And she made them tight with the pin, and said to him, the Philistines are upon you, Samson. But he awoke from his sleep and pulled away the pin, the loom, and the web. And she said to him, how can you say you love me when your heart is not with me? You have mocked me these 3 times, and you have not told me where your great strength lies. And when she pressed him hard with her words day after day, and urged him, his soul was vexed to death. And he told her all his heart, and said to her, a razor has never come upon my head, for I have been a Nazarite to God from my mother's womb. If my head is shaved, then my strength will leave me, and I will become weak and be like any other man. When Delilah saw that he had told her all his heart, she sent and she called the lords of the Philistines, saying, come up again, for he has told me all his heart. And the lords of the Philistines came up to her and brought the money in their hands. And she made him sleep on her knees. And she called a man and had him shave off the 7 locks of his head. Then she began to torment him, and his strength left him. And she said, "The Philistines are upon you, Samson." And he awoke from his sleep and said, "I will go out as at other times and shake myself free." But he did not know that the Lord had left him. And the Philistines seized him and gouged out his eyes and brought him down to Gaza and bound him with bronze shackles. And he ground at the mill in the prison. But the hair of his head began to grow again after he had been shaved. Now the lords of the Philistines gathered to offer a great sacrifice to Dagon, their god, and to rejoice. And they said, "Our God has given Samson, our enemy, into our hand." When the people saw him, they praised their God. For they said, "Our God has given our enemy into our hand, the ravager of our country, who has killed many of us." And when their hearts were merry, they said, "Call Samson, that he may entertain us." So they called Samson out of the prison, and he entertained them. They made him stand between the pillars, and Samson said to the young man who held him by the hand, "Let me feel the pillars on which the house rests, that I may lean against them." Now the house was full of men and women. All the lords of the Philistines were there, and on the roof there were about 3,000 men and women who looked on while Samson entertained. Then Samson called to the Lord and said, "O Lord God, please remember me. Please strengthen me only this once. O God, that I may be avenged on the Philistines for my 2 eyes." And Samson grasped the 2 middle pillars on which the house rested, and he leaned his weight against them, his right hand on the one and his left hand on the other. And Samson said, "Let me die with the Philistines." And he bowed with all his strength. And the house fell upon the lords and upon all the people who were in it. So the dead whom he killed at his death were more than those whom he had killed during his life. And then his brothers and all his family came down, and they took him and brought him up and buried him between Zorah and Eshtaol in the tomb of Manoah his father. He had judged Israel 20 years. Incredible story, isn't it? I mean, if you've been in Sunday school since you were a little boy, a little girl, you know that story. You've heard that story. You've read that story. You know all about that story. Yet when you read that story again, even again and again and again, boy, it's hard to believe. It's just really an incredible story in a lot of different ways. Samson was a man, had a very special calling from God on his life. You remember even from his birth, God made it clear to Samson's mother that he was going to be used by God to do in an extraordinary way. She was told, Samson's mother was told by the angel of the Lord, if you remember, that her son would be used to deliver God's people Israel from Philistine oppression, and that's exactly what happened. The angel of the Lord told Samson's parents that he was to take a Nazirite vow from birth, even before birth, as his mother was to be a Nazirite until he was born. So in other words, he was to be separated unto the Lord from the rest of Israel for a God-given purpose. This man had a very special calling from God upon his life. Unique calling. This meant, according to Numbers chapter 6, that he was never to cut his hair, he was never to drink alcohol, and he was never to touch any dead person or animal to keep the Nazirite vow. Well, we've seen in the last 2 Wednesdays that Samson has broken 2 of these conditions. He has drunk alcohol at a party, and he's touched the carcass of a lion that he had killed earlier. Remember, to get honey out. The only thing left is the hair. And of course, here we read in chapter 16 that his hair gets cut. When I look at Samson's life and I evaluate it, Samson's life is certainly a moral tragedy. A moral tragedy, no doubt. And yet, God used him for his own purposes, right? Despite Samson's moral failures. Somebody asked me, and I kind of responded online, How can you, as a Christian pastor, support a Donald Trump? He's arrogant. He's conceited. There's not a humble bone in his body. He's a womanizer. He's a philanderer. He said the most awful things of women. How can you support such a man as Donald Trump? And I said, well, two things. One, when I look at Donald Trump, I certainly would not get my marriage advice from him. And I certainly would not get any kind of spiritual advice from him. Those are not the areas, and by the way, those are not the areas that I voted to put him in office for either, to give me spiritual advice or marriage advice. By the way, the woman who preached at him, she shouldn't be given the spiritual advice either. It's another reason why women shouldn't be in the pulpit, but nonetheless, Satan does have many faces. But then secondly, when I look at Donald Trump, I see him as Samson. A moral failure in many ways, sure. We have seen the self-will of Samson. Get me that woman, you remember? I want her. Sweetheart, can't you find a good Hebrew girl? No, she delights me. I want her. Strong self-will, arrogant, conceited. Oh, I'm going to shake myself just like I've always done in the past. And no humility at all. That's Donald Trump. Sure is. No doubt about it. He's made an incredible businessman, but probably not somebody you want to spend a lot of time with. Not somebody you want influencing your kids. And yet, Pastor, you voting for him for president? Sure. Why? Because I've hired him to do the things that I want him to do. He's going to be used as a hero, as a deliverer from the crazy woke leftist agenda in our country. Just like Samson was. Samson, a moral failure. Look at Samson. Great calling on Samson's life. Trump has said, I believe God salvaged me, saved me from being killed on that Pennsylvania field to do what God's called me to do. Maybe he did, maybe he didn't. Trump's convinced of it. There's a special calling on his life to do what he's doing, just like what we read here about Samson, a special calling on his life. Both, there's so many similarities between the two. It's almost uncanny. And yet, both used by God, I think, to accomplish God's will. To accomplish God's will. And all right. Let's go back through this. Judges chapter 16, and look at verse number 1. Samson went to Gaza, and there he saw a prostitute. Told you this chapter doesn't start good. And he went into her. Let's talk about where he went first, to Gaza. One of the 5 major Philistine cities. It's 3 miles inland from the Mediterranean coast. In Hebrew, there are 2 words for harlot. There's the word that's used for a harlot who performs sex acts in worship of a false god. And then there's just the normal use of the word for a prostitute or a harlot. That's what this one is here. Just run of the mill, if you will, prostitute. Verse number 2. The Gazites were told, well, Samson has come here. And they surrounded the place and they set an ambush for him all night at the gate of the city. And they kept quiet all night, saying, let us wait till the light of the morning, and then we will kill him. It literally would read, not at the gate, but rather in the gates. The gates in the early Bronze Age or Iron Age, these gates would have been at least 2 stories tall. Okay? Really tall metal gates. There would have been guard rooms in this narrow opening where you could walk through there, but there would have been guard rooms on either side of the gate. That's where these people were hiding, inside these little guard rooms on the edges of this big 2-story gate. Hoping, of course, to trap Samson. He evidently slipped through unnoticed while they waited in one of the rooms. Look at verse number 3. But Samson lay till midnight. The idea is there just till midnight. He didn't stay all night. And at midnight he arose and he took hold of the doors of the gate of the city and the 2 posts. I just told you it's 2 stories tall. And he grabs a hold of the doors and the post, and get this, bar and all, and put them on his shoulders and carried them to the top of the hill that is in front of Hebron. Hebron is 40 miles from Gaza. I mean, it was quite a feat just to pick it up. If he was just going to take it up a hill over there, 40 miles away, it would have taken him most of the rest of the night. If he leaves out of there at midnight, sometimes the next morning or most all the next day, he's taking that hike. Okay, this is quite a feat. By the way, again, I say to you, I don't think if you looked at Samson that he was this hulk of a guy, for then his strength would have been obvious where it came from. But he's performing, honestly, supernatural acts. Nobody does that. I don't care how much iron you push around. You're not taking a 2-story iron gate and its post, the doors, 40 miles on your shoulders. Oxen would struggle to do that. Look at verse number 4. After this, he loved a woman in the valley of Sorek whose name was Delilah. This is the 3rd Philistine woman that Samson's gotten tangled with here. When you look at his downfall with Delilah, of course, she's working in cooperation with these leaders, tries, finally succeeds there. Look at verse number 5. And the lords of the Philistines came up to her and said to her, seduce him and see where his great strength lies, and by what means we may overpower him, that we may bind him to humble him. And we will each give you 1,100 pieces of silver. So Delilah said to Samson, please tell me where your great strength lies and how you might be bound, that one could subdue you. 1,100 pieces of silver is a large sum of money. That's a lot of money. And then there's 5, so she's receiving 1,100 pieces of silver times 5. One commentator wrote that probably would weigh more than 100 pounds of silver. Wow, that's a lot of money. Why are they willing to do this? Because Samson has killed thousands in his lifetime. Now, the Philistines, give you just a little bit of history there. The Philistines didn't have one ruler or one place of rule. There were 5 rulers, and that's what the rulers of the Philistines are. And they ruled in 5 different cities. They ruled in Ashdod, Ashkelon, Ekron, Gath, and Gaza. And so these are the most powerful men in the country. It'd be like a country ruled by 5 governors with no president. These 5 governors show up and they say, we want to destroy this man. We're going to give you a fortune if you can figure out how we can subdue him. Verse 7, Samson said to her, well, if they bind me with 7 fresh bowstrings that have not been dried, then I shall become weak and be like any other man. Then the lords of the Philistines brought up to her 7 fresh bowstrings that had not been dried, and she bound him with them. So this first test was breaking 7 fresh bowstrings made of animal gut. Okay, that's what it would have been made of, and it would have been fresh, it would have been the strongest, not dried out. So, why did he do this? Because he's mocking her, and he is. He knows that he's going to be able to bust that free. Verse 9, now when she had men lying in ambush in an inner chamber, and she said to him, the Philistines are upon you, Samson. But he snapped the bowstrings as a thread of flax snaps when it touches the fire. So the secret of his strength was not known. Then Delilah said to Samson, behold, you have mocked me and told me lies. Tell me how you might be bound. My first question would be, why do you want to know? Why do you care so much? What's the deal? Why do you want to know what's going to keep me from being as strong as I am? Leave me, talk to me about something else. Leave me alone but no, he just, the power of lust is absolutely incredible. Absolutely incredible. You say, how did this man lose his mind? How many men do you know have lost their mind? They've lost their marriage. They've lost their children. They've lost their job. They've lost everything they've worked for in life. Men in my occupation, they've lost their ministry. They've literally lost their mind over lust, over sex. Highly overrated. And yet we read about Samson and Delilah and we think, man, dude, you're just stupid. But let's be honest. It's not like it's a one-off. It's not like it's unique. It's very, very, very sadly common. But she keeps asking, please tell me how you might be bound. And he said to her, well, if they bind me with new ropes. Now, he'd already been bound with new ropes earlier. Okay? If they bind me with new ropes that have not been used, then I shall become weak and be like any other man. Second test, he's still toying with the Philistines, proven worthless as earlier. Verse 12, so Delilah took new ropes, bound him with them, and said to him, the Philistines are upon you, Samson. And the men lying in ambush were in an inner chamber, but he snapped the ropes off his hands like a thread. Don't you think you'd show her the door? I mean, this is two times. Two times you wake up to your hands are bound. I mean, like, sister, you're gone. I mean, there's just no way. But again, it's what we talked about, the temptation. Then Delilah, and then she has the audacity to accuse him of wrongdoing. Then Delilah said to Samson, well, until now you have mocked me and told me lies. Tell me how you might be bound. And he said, well, and he's getting closer because now he starts talking about his hair. He said, if you weave the 7 locks of my head with the with the web and fasten it tight with a pin, then I shall become weak and be like any other man. The third test here basically puts his head into a weaver's loom, okay, an upright vertical. And if you tie my head, the 7 locks into a weaver's loom, then I won't be able to get out. Verse 14. So while he slept, guess what happened? She took the 7 locks of his head, wove them into the web. She made them tight with a pin and said to him, the Philistines are upon you, Samson. But he awoke from his sleep and pulled away the pin, the loom, and the web. And she said to him, there's no conversation of him ever saying anything here to her. She's doing all the talking. And it's like, I don't know. I don't know. I don't know. And she said to him, how can you say I love you? Sweetheart, how do you say you love me is my question. 3 times now, you've tied me up. There's strange people in the bedroom when I wake up. You've tied me up, and you're questioning my love and loyalty to you? It's not in the text. She said to him, how can you say I love you when your heart is not with me? You have mocked me these 3 times, and you have not told me where your strength lies. I have no words. I have no words. When I read this, I've read the story. How many times have you read the story? And you read it and you scratch your head and you're like, yeah. I mean, what is wrong with you? And I have no explanation other than the obvious one. The desire for sexual pleasure. That's it. That's it. That one thing, that's it. I mean, it's just, it truly boggles the mind. Verse 16, and when she pressed him hard with her words day by day, and urged him. That reminds me of when I read that. There was another Hebrew who was pursued by a woman. Do you remember? That was who? I think I heard. Joseph and Potiphar's wife. You remember that? Day by day he would go into the house to do his work, and day by day she was going after that young Hebrew boy. Day after day, and urged him, and his soul was vexed to death. Strong words right there. She's just nagging and nagging and nagging and nagging and nagging. And finally, he's like, "Leave me alone, woman. You're killing me." Aren't you glad I had it turned down a while ago? Joseph did, yeah. Too bad Samson didn't learn that lesson. Verse 17, and he told her all his heart. And he said to her, a razor's never come upon my head. For I have been a Nazarite to God from my mother's womb. If my head is shaved, then my strength will leave me, and I will become weak and be like any other man. When Delilah saw that he had told her all his heart, she sent and called the lords of the Philistines, saying, "Come up again, for he's told me all his heart." Then the lords of the Philistines came up to her and brought the money in her hands. A razor in Samson's day would have been basically a bronze knife with a handle on it, maybe a bone for a handle or a piece of wood for a handle. That's what they would have used in that day. She just keeps asking him about it. Again, third time, now the fourth time. Sometimes we make excuses for the sin that we do. What's Samson's excuse? Well, she just kept after me and kept after me and kept after me and kept after me. What a pitiful excuse. I mean that. What a pitiful excuse. You just gave in. You've heard me use this. It used to be a very common cliche use of words. I've used it before. He basically handed over his man card. He's just like, where's your manhood, man? Where's your strength of integrity? Do you have? You're big and strong. Don't you have some spiritual steel in the backbone there to keep you upright before the Lord? Now you look at that and you just, what a pitiful excuse. Well, she wouldn't leave me alone about it. She wouldn't leave me alone about it. Verse 19. Well, that night she made him sleep on her knees. There's no amount of money in all the world that ever have my head sleep on Delilah's knees. No way in the world. No way. Not after 3 episodes. This is number 4. No, just ain't no way in the world. There's no amount of alcohol, I think, that can make me so drunk as to make me put my head on Delilah's knees. And she called a man and had him shave off the 7 locks of his head. Then she began to torment him, and his strength left him. And she said, "The Philistines are upon you, Samson." And he awoke from his sleep, and he said, "I will go out as at other times and shake myself free." There's the arrogance, there's the haughtiness, there's the sense, I can do this. And then the saddest line in the book of Judges, but he did not know that the Lord had left him. What a terrible, terrible thing. Disqualified himself to be used by God in a big way anymore. He'd broken all 3 aspects of the Nazirite vow. God said, "You know what? I can't use you. I can't use you." And the Philistines seized him and gouged out his eyes. I remember reading that as a kid or as a teenager early in life, and you got this buildup, and I didn't know the story. Remember, I learned the stories as a teenager when I was dating this girl named Melissa in high school, and And I was learning the Bible stories along as I was teaching them to the second graders at our church there. And I remember reading this. I remember thinking, did I read that? They gouged out his eyes? This is one of the heroes. They gouged out his eyes? They brought him down to Gaza and bound him with bronze shackles. He ground at the mill in the prison. But the hair of his head began to grow again after it had been shaved. One writer said this: Delilah was a deceitful woman with honey on her lips and poison in her heart. That's a good summation. She was cold and calculating. She toyed with Samson, pretending to love him while looking for personal gain. Why was she doing this? 5,500 pieces of silver, that's how. Why? How could Samson be so foolish? 4 times Delilah took advantage of him. This writer says if he didn't realize what was happening after the first or the second experience, surely he should have understood the situation by the 4th time. We think Samson is foolish, but how many times do we allow ourselves to be deceived by flattery and give in to temptation and wrong beliefs? And I thought that's a good application. Think about this. Because he fell into that, Samson, this mighty warrior, became a slave. Great mighty warrior, now just a slave. And rather than killing him, the Philistines, they gouge out his eyes and they make a trophy out of him. You know, after that, Samson had all, you think, man, where was your head during all of that? Well, in that darkness, he had all the time in the world to think about the decision he had made. Oh, but haven't we all been there? What was I thinking? What was I thinking? Am I the only one? You've been there? Samson wasn't much of a life left. It would be a short life after that. But he had the rest of his life in the darkness of blindness to think about the decisions, the foolish mistakes he had made. Look at verse. By the way, isn't it interesting? They take him back to where? Gaza. Gaza had been known as the place where he showed great strength. Now it's the place where he's been humbled, humiliated, mocked, ridiculed. They make sport out of him. Verse 23, now the lords of the Philistines gathered to offer a great sacrifice to Dagon their god and to rejoice. And they said, our God has given Samson, our enemy, into our hand. No, Jehovah God allowed it to happen, friend, but nonetheless. And when the people saw him, they praised their God. For they said, our God has given our enemy into our hand, the ravager of our country, who has killed many of us. And when their hearts were merry, they said, call Samson that he may entertain us. So they called Samson out of the prison and entertained them, and they made him stand between the pillars. Dagon was the chief god of the Philistines. He was originally thought to have been a fish god. It was later discovered by archaeologists and students of that era of history that he was a god of wheat or a god of harvest. Matter of fact, one of the Hebrew words for wheat is Dagon. Interesting there. Look at verse number 28. Then Samson called to the Lord and said, O Lord God, please remember me and please strengthen me only this once. You just feel sorry for the fellow at this point, don't you? I read this and I'm just like, you want to put your arm around him. You want to say, man, I just feel so bad for you. Please remember me and please strengthen me only this once. Oh God, that I may... His purpose is not really an admirable reason. He's seeking vengeance. He still has not become a godly person by any means. that I might be avenged on the Philistines for my 2 eyes. Samson grasped the 2 middle pillars on which the house rested, and he leaned his weight against them, and his right hand on the one and his left hand on the other. And Samson said, "Let me die with the Philistines." And then he bowed with all his strength, and the house fell upon the lords and upon all the people who were in it. So the dead whom he killed at his death were more than those whom he had killed during his life. This is only the second time that's recorded that Samson called on the Lord. Just the second time. What a gracious God is to hear his prayer. But you remember, you need to go back to that special calling. You need to go back to the time when the angel of the Lord appeared to Manoah's wife and then to the both of them and told them, hey, he has a purpose. What was that purpose? Remember? To do what? To deliver Israel from the... And it's happening here. It's happening here. God in His great mercy and in His sovereignty, God can do what He wants to do. I read some things in the Bible and I think, I'm not ever going to question you, Lord. But Lord, if I would, this would be one of those instances. God in His great mercy heard Samson's prayer. And Samson was able to do what he'd asked for, to have his eyes avenged. You know, you kind of get the idea that Samson has been humbled, though. No, I get the idea that his purpose for killing all these is not the same purpose as the Lord's. But he's humbled. The fact that he's asking. You know, sometimes I'm afraid sin keeps us from humbling ourselves and going to the Lord. When really it's the Lord, He's the only one that can bring about restoration in our situation. That which keeps us from the Lord, from the only one who can help us with that which is keeping us from Him. See the cycle? I sin and I don't want to go near the Lord, but it's only the Lord that can get me back, restored back to the Lord. And so there's only one solution. You got to humble yourself. You got to humble yourself. You got to go back to God. God, I'm so sorry. No matter how long a person has been away from God, God is ready to hear us and restore us to a right relationship. No matter how long. Samson basically lived his whole life away from God. Every situation can be salvaged if we're willing to turn again to Him. And if God could still work in Samson's situation, I think He could certainly work in any of our situations as well. Right? Verse 31, then his brothers and all his family came down. They took him and brought him up and buried him between Zorah and Eshtaol in the tomb of Manoah his father, and he had judged Israel 20 years. Samson's life is ultimately a story about God's faithfulness in spite of human weakness. That's what it's about. God's faithfulness despite our human weaknesses. I think it also can be seen here that God's hand throughout the story, you see God's hand in Samson being empowered by the Lord, and in God's desire to subdue the Philistines. You see God at work all the way through it. Of course, killing more Philistines in his death than He did in his life, showing again that Jehovah God is greater than Dagon, the Philistine god. All of those are elements that you see in the story of Samson here. Wrap up the chapter, the story of the judges concludes with a final editorial comment, despite the several failings of the judges themselves. And it wasn't just Samson who failed. As we've gone back, we could see the failings of others, God had delivered Israel and had caused other nations to bow before him. What we've said before, we'll say again. The only kind of people God has to use are sinners. Now, we can disqualify ourselves, no doubt. And God wants us to humble ourselves and to keep things right with him. But if you keep waiting, well, somebody else is going to need to do that. I don't feel worthy. You ought to be a pastor for 24 hours and try to feel worthy of it. You can't do it. You can't do it. To stand before a congregation of people and preach the perfect word of God, I'm just a crooked stick trying to make a straight line. If you wait until you feel worthy, you're going to go to your grave doing nothing. Because you never feel worthy. Never feel worthy. I got ready to come to Bible study today, didn't feel worthy. Sunday morning, I'll wake up. I think I'm finally to the place where I'm still not nauseated. Up until just a couple of years ago, I was still nauseated on Sunday mornings after all these years. But still, you're like, Lord, what? Get somebody else. I just don't feel worthy. But the only kind of people God has are people like you and me. Amen? Thank God he uses us for his glory. Despite the general poor example of the judges themselves, God had worked to deliver Israel and to protect his name and reputation. God knows what he's doing even when we mess things up, and he can take even our mess ups and use them for his glory. That's the big thrust as I see in the book of Judges, and especially in the life of this man named Samson. Let's have a word of prayer and ask God's blessing on Sunday, on these that we've made prayer requests for, on our opportunities to be a witness for him. Anybody be willing? One of you men be willing? All right, Jerry, would you do that, please? Let's pray.